The war on drugs is racist. Period. Most studies show that black folks do not use or sell illegal drugs any more than white folks do. Slightly less black than white youth sell drugs, slightly less black than white folks use marijuana, meth, hallucinogens, or illegal painkillers. Slightly more black than white folks do use crack cocaine, but almost twice as many white than black folks use powder cocaine, and both use heroin at the same level. Those who treat the health effects of drug addiction know this. White youth have about 3 times the number of drug-related emergency room visits as their black neighbors. The facts are clear. Black and white Americans sell and use illegal drugs at remarkably similar rates. But black and white Americans are targeted by the drug war at remarkably different rates. Black men are nearly 12 times as likely to be imprisoned for drug use as white men. Black folks are over 3 times more likely to be arrested for pot possession than white folks. Though less than 15% of the population is black, about half of all who enter prison for a drug conviction are black. Thanks to the drug war, 8 times as many white folks were imprisoned for drug offenses in 2000 as were in 1983, but 26 times as many black folks were in the same time span. And once they're imprisoned, black folks are serving longer sentences. The result, of all persons imprisoned for drug offenses, about 3/4 are black or Latino. The facts are clear. Black and white Americans are targeted by the drug war at remarkably different rates, despite black and white Americans selling and using illegal drugs at remarkably similar rates. The drug war is racist. Period. But we're not going to be able to fix this problem if we don't understand how the drug war's racism works. The first thing to understand is that our brains, all of our brains, learn and use patterns to navigate our daily lives. We create structures of thought that associate fire with painful burns, ice cream with happiness, and people wearing ski masks while brandishing bloody knives in our living room with danger. Most of these patterns are good for us. They help us make decisions quickly in situations where swiftness is needed. If we didn't have these patterns in our brain, we'd be paralyzed, having to sit and analyze every single slightly new situation as it comes. But sometimes this pattern making is dangerous. We start associating people who are different than us as bad. We start letting the powerful dictate to us which groups we should view as violent. We begin to suffer from prejudice. Psychologists call this implicit bias, and here's the worst thing. Loads of studies show that even if we explicitly believe something different than our implicit bias, we can't easily escape it and still act unconsciously on the false patterns our brain has falsely learned. We all suffer from this. We're human. Now, in the 1980s and 90s, as the drug war ramped up, a structure of thought was promoted and disseminated by politicians and the media: the association of drug crime with black men. In the early 1980s, the typical cocaine-related news story focused on white folks who snorted powder cocaine and their addiction recovery process. But by 1985, the war on drugs had been launched, and politicians needed validation for their mushrooming spending on it. So the White House led a media offensive to sensationalize the emergence of crack cocaine in inner-city neighborhoods. The new frame was one of being under siege from black crack dealers. Drugs were no longer reported as a public health issue, they were a law enforcement issue now. The media went nuts over the quote-unquote black drug criminal. As one of the Drug Enforcement Agency's public relations managers put it, crack was the hottest combat reporting story to come along since the end of the Vietnam War. The ombudsman of the Washington Post, which ran over 1,000 stories on the drug scourge in 1989 alone, later admitted that the paper had lost its proper sense of perspective, and politicians were doing a number on people's heads. But it was too late. Ideas like crack whores, crack babies, gangbangers, and urban predators had entered the public consciousness. By the 1990s, after a decade of this politically driven, mythical media bonanza, most Americans had a well-entrenched, false implicit bias associating drug criminals with black men. A 1995 study asked participants to envision a drug user and describe what they looked like. 95% of respondents pictured a black man, despite black men being only about 15% of drug users and dealers at the time. Another study showed participants a news story about street crime where no image of the criminal was shown at all. 60% of viewers recalled seeing the image. 70% believed the perpetrator was black. The idea of the criminal black man even made it hard for people to see criminal white men. One U.S. attorney tells this story. A defendant was caught dealing drugs while in the possession of a gun. The U.S. attorney's assistant says they should drop the gun charge against him because, he's a rural guy and grew up on a farm. The gun he had with him was a rifle. He's a good old boy, and good old boys have rifles, and it's not like he was a gun-toting drug dealer. But that's exactly what he was, a gun-toting drug dealer. But the assistant's implicit bias of associating gun-toting drug dealers with urban black men made it hard for him to see that. So indeed, this was a deeply entrenched bias, despite being completely false. All of us struggle with implicit biases, and all of us who were alive during the 1980s and 90s were steeped in a media landscape that associated drug crime with black men. And most importantly to note, law enforcement officials were no different. They were not immune to this media phenomenon. So that's the first thing to understand about the drug war's racism. Our brains make patterns associating things with other things. Politicians and the media spent the 80s and 90s associating drug crime with urban black men, despite that being false. And all of us humans who consumed media then, including the humans that run the criminal justice system, had this pattern encoded in our brains. The second thing you have to understand is that because of the strange nature of drug crimes, the drug war widely expanded law enforcement discretion, the freedom to decide what should be done in each particular situation. With other crimes, the police usually come knocking because the victim called the police. With drug crimes, there's no explicit victim. So with drug crimes, the police have to proactively decide to go someplace. But drug use is really popular, so the police have to choose where to go. And in 2002, for example, there were 19.5 million drug users, but only 1.5 million drug arrests and only 175,000 drug users sent to prison. If less than 1 out of every 10 users are arrested, and 1 out of every 10 arrested are sent to prison, who gets to decide who the unlucky few are? Well, the police and prosecutor get to decide using their wide discretion. So the police decide where to search for drugs, discretion. Who to search when they get there, discretion. Then the prosecutor gets to decide who to prosecute, discretion. Who to prosecute in state as opposed to federally, discretion. Who to kick up from juvenile to adult court, discretion. How harsh a sentence to pursue, discretion. How lenient a plea deal, discretion. In the drug war, everywhere along the line, the police and prosecutor have wide discretion. Now, remember, when a human makes choices, those patterns in their brain are guiding them. So given that these police and prosecutors are humans just like the rest of us, when they make choices, they're using those patterns in their brains to guide their choices at work too. And given that they suffered under the same decades-long political and media con job about the mythical criminal black man, their choices are going to be, at the very least, a tiny bit biased towards associating drug crime with urban black men. And now, given all this discretion in the drug war, there's a lot of choices they have to make, which is a lot of opportunities for that brain pattern to sneak into their real-world action. To put it simply, implicit bias in the brain plus wide discretion on the job equals real-world discrimination. Some of you are thinking, interesting theory, but does it actually work that way in the real world? Yes. Unfortunately, you can see this discrimination at work in every link of the chain. Take where to target drug searches. SWAT teams are often used for drug searches, but we rarely see them descend out of helicopters into gated neighborhoods to raid coke parties after lacrosse games, nor bust open doors of college frat houses known to supply drugs to entire campus communities. Nope, SWAT deployments primarily impact people of color and hit black neighborhoods the hardest. Or take who to arrest once you get to a place. A 2002 University of Washington study looked at how police made arrests in mixed-race open-air drug markets. Black dealers were far more likely to be arrested than whites, even though white dealers were more present and visible. Or who to pull over and search. A New Jersey study in the 90s found that only 15% of drivers on the New Jersey Turnpike were minorities, yet 42% of all stops and 73% of all arrests were of black motorists. Black folks and white folks violated traffic laws at the same rate. Radar stops, i.e. robots without false brain patterns like us humans, showed no racial bias. but discretionary stops resulted in more than double the number of minorities pulled over. Or take who to stop on the street and search. A study of the New York police showed that black folks were 6 times more likely to be stopped while walking than white folks, and 5 times more likely to be arrested than white folks for small pot possessions. With police, study after study shows that implicit bias in the brain plus wide discretion on the job equals serious real-world discrimination. The same goes for prosecutors. Take charging people. One prosecutor's office in LA prosecuted 53 crack cases in a 3-year period. 48 black defendants, 5 Hispanic, and not a single white defendant. In the case brought against them, a halfway house intake coordinator from the prosecutor's jurisdiction testified that white and black folks in the area dealt and used drugs in similar proportions. Take kicking people to federal court. A defense attorney in LA in the 90s testified that white defendants were routinely prosecuted in state rather than federal court. During a 3-year period, 2,000 plus people were charged with federal crack cocaine violations. All but 11 were black, none were white. Take plea bargaining. A San Jose Mercury News study of 700,000 cases found that similarly situated white folks were far more successful than black and Latino folks in the plea bargaining process. So for prosecutors too, implicit bias in the brain plus wide discretion at work equals real-world discrimination. And since all these form a chain from search to sentencing, you would expect to see the discrimination adding up as you move along the chain, and that's exactly what you see. One recent Justice Department study showed that black youth are 16% of all youth, but 28% of all youth arrests, but 35% of all waivers to adult court, and 58% of all youth admitted to state adult prison. Implicit bias in the brain plus wide discretion on the job equals real-world discrimination, and it shows and grows at every link in the criminal justice chain. If this is the case, why can't people, sue or something? They have. But here's the third thing you have to understand. The courts won't listen to the evidence. In McCleskey versus Kemp, it was shown that murderers of white victims received the death penalty 11 times more than murderers of black victims. But the court said that statistics on racial bias in sentencing don't matter unless you show clear evidence of conscious discriminatory intent in each specific case. So unless you have, say, an audio recording of some prosecutor saying, "Let's get this guy because he's black," you're out of luck. But as we showed above, implicit bias doesn't work that way. In the ruling, the court said, if we accepted McCleskey's claim that racial bias has impermissibly tainted the capital sentencing decision, we should soon be faced with similar claims to other types of penalty. Exactly. If we finally admitted the truth about racial bias in each part of the system, it would force us to seriously reform the whole criminal justice system. But as Justice Brennan wrote in dissent, the court's decision seemed to suggest a fear of too much justice. In 1995, folks challenged Georgia's 2 strikes and you're out penalty for a second drug crime because it was invoked on 16% of black defendants, but only 1% of white defendants, leading to black folks making up 98.4% of those serving life sentences under the provision. Finally, a court said, okay, Georgia, you have to justify this disparity. But the Georgia Attorney General and every Georgia district attorney, all of whom were white, fought back, arguing that the whole criminal justice system would be paralyzed if this decision stood because there were racial disparities on most issues in the system. Exactly. But the Georgia Supreme Court gave in to the pressure and reversed itself. So as long as no one says anything explicitly racist, which will never happen because that's not how implicit bias works, the courthouse doors are closed to claims of racial bias in the criminal justice system. So, to recap how the drug war's racism works. First, our brains make patterns to help us make choices. A pattern associating drug crime with black men was popularized by a media bonanza in the 80s and 90s despite being false. This is called implicit racial bias. 2, drug enforcement allows for wide discretion for police to decide which fraction of the millions of American drug users to arrest, and prosecutors to decide which fraction of drug arrests to prosecute aggressively. This wide discretion on the job plus implicit bias in the brain equals real-world discrimination, which grows at every link in the criminal justice chain. And 3, the courthouse doors are closed to glaring discrimination statistics unless you have proof of explicit racism in every individual case, which you'll never have. Now you know. So, how do we fix it? For one, if the courthouse doors are closed, we must take the other route through elections and legislation. In the coming months, make sure to educate and challenge your candidates, from state legislators on up to the presidential contenders, on what they should do to end the scourge of the racist drug war.